Good evening and welcome back. If this is the hour when the room has gone still and the world outside your window has begun to feel far away, then let this video keep you company in the background, softly and without hurry. Tonight we'll spend some time with Greek mythology, with its gods and heroes, its sacred mountains and sea journeys, its unlikely births, its quiet punishments, and its old ideas about fate. These stories have been told for so long that they feel almost like weather, something ancient moving gently through the human mind. If you enjoy these slow, quiet journeys, you can like the video, subscribe, or leave a comment if you'd like, perhaps with where you're listening from tonight, or what calm topic you'd enjoy next. For now, let the lights stay low, let your shoulders settle, and let the night widen a little around you. We'll begin with the feeling of those old stories, and then move slowly from god to god, place to place, and detail to detail, as if turning pages in a very old book by soft lamplight. When people first imagine Greek mythology, they often picture Mount Olympus. It is one of those names that feels larger than a place. In the old stories, Olympus is the home of the gods, high above the world of ordinary people, wrapped in cloud and light. It is not always described in the same way, because myths were never just one fixed story. There were many voices, many local traditions, many different poets remembering and reshaping the same divine family. The Greek gods were not always distant abstractions. They could feel near, even personal. They were linked to springs, forests, cities, harbors, crossroads, and household fires. A god might be grand enough to rule thunder and still feel present in a small offering left at a roadside shrine. That is one reason these stories have lasted so long. They live at both scales. They are cosmic and they are domestic. Zeus is often the first name people meet. He is the sky, the storm, the ruler of Olympus, the keeper of order, and in many stories a figure of great authority and great contradiction. His symbols are familiar now, the thunderbolt, the eagle, the throne. But his old presence was not simply the image of a bearded king. He was part of a system of belief in which power, justice, hospitality, and oath-making all mattered deeply. A broken promise could become a sacred offense. An insult to a guest could matter more than one might expect in a modern story. And besides Zeus stood Hera, who is often remembered for marriage, queenship, and the careful boundaries of family life. In the myths, she is not calm in a simple way. She is forceful, observant, proud, and sometimes severe. Her stories remind us that the Greek gods were never meant to be gentle symbols only. They were human in their passions, but larger than human in their reach. There is something almost restful in the fact that the Greeks did not try to make their divine world perfectly tidy. Their gods argued, they changed shape, they interfered, they favored one city and disliked another. They could be approached with prayer but never fully controlled. It gave the old world a sense of uncertainty, but also texture, as if every hill and harbor had a memory attached to it. The gods were also connected to specific places in the landscape. Athens had Athene. The sea belonged in many tales to Poseidon. Apollo was linked to music, healing, prophecy, and the clear light of ordered thought. Artemis moved through wild country, through groves and hills and moonlit places where the human world thinned a little at the edges. Hermes slipped between boundaries, carrying messages, watching roads, guiding travelers, and moving so quickly that he seems almost to belong to the gap between one moment and the next. When you sit with these names for a while, they stop feeling like vocabulary and start feeling like atmosphere. They are not only characters, they are presences. They belong to a world where a forest could be inhabited by more than trees, where a mountain could be more than stone, and where the sea could feel like a thinking thing. That is one of the quiet facts about Greek mythology. It does not ask to be read only as a set of ancient tales. It is also a way of noticing the world, one that gave personality to distance, danger, weather, duty, and longing. It made the landscape emotionally legible. It said that the world was not blank. It was inhabited, watched, and full of meaning. And once that idea takes hold, it is easy to see why the stories were so durable. A myth can survive not because everyone agrees on every detail, but because it keeps finding new rooms in the mind. It can be retold around a hearth, written by a poet, carved on a temple, or remembered in a line of family prayer. It can be solemn or playful or deeply strange. It can remain alive because it never truly belongs to one person alone. So as we continue, it may help to think of Greek mythology less like a single book and more like a great old house with many corridors. Some rooms are bright and ceremonial, some are dark and intimate, some contain battles, some contain weddings, some are filled with monsters, some are nearly empty except for one important object, one name, one small gesture that changes everything. In Greek religion and myth, the gods were not only stories to be heard. They were beings to be met through ritual, habit, and offering. A little oil, a cup of wine, a few grains, a spoken promise, a moment of silence before a journey, these things mattered. The divine world was not imagined as far removed from daily life. It was woven into it. One gentle thing to remember is that ancient Greek religion and Greek mythology are related, but not exactly the same. Mythology tells the stories. Religion lived in the actions, the festivals, the sacrifices, the local customs, the sacred spaces. A myth might explain why a festival existed, or why a goddess had a particular title, but not every myth was treated as a literal account in the way modern people might expect. The ancient world had room for symbol, memory, and inherited practice all at once. The Greeks often honored a god in the place where that god was thought to have a special presence. A sanctuary could be grand, but it could also be simple. A stone, a tree, a spring, a clearing, these could become important if the community believed that a divine force had marked them. Over time, such places gathered stories the way a shoreline gathers shells. A story leads to another story, and then a custom, and then a procession, and then a temple, and then a memory of the temple long after the stones have changed hands. One of the most interesting parts of Greek myth is how often it reflects the shape of the world as people actually lived it. Cities were central, families were central, hospitality was central. The idea of xenia or sacred guest friendship appears again and again. A stranger might be a threat, but also a guest, and perhaps a god in disguise. That uncertainty gives many Greek stories a peculiar softness at the edges. You never entirely know who is standing before you. There are so many small ritual details hidden inside the myths. Before a meal, a little portion might be set aside for the gods. Before a voyage, prayers might be offered to Poseidon. Before a battle, people looked for signs, omens, and favorable answers. A flight of birds could matter. An odd sound in the night could matter. Dreams could matter too, especially when they arrived with that mysterious weight that dreams sometimes have, as if they came from a place just beyond ordinary speech. Apollo, in particular, belonged to that world of signs. At Delphi, one of the most famous sacred sites in the ancient Greek world, his oracle offered guidance in cryptic and carefully interpreted forms. People came with questions about war, travel, family, and politics. They wanted some glimpse of what was hidden. Of course, myths and history should not be blurred together too quickly, but the oracle's reputation shows how deeply the Greeks valued the possibility that the divine could speak through pattern, symbol, and ambiguous language. It is soothing, in a way, to imagine a culture that accepted ambiguity as part of wisdom. A message did not have to be plain to be meaningful. A story did not have to be literal to be powerful. A god did not have to appear every day to remain important. Some forms of belief work by nearness and some work by memory, and Greek mythology carries both. There were also local versions of famous stories. A hero might be celebrated in one city and only faintly known in another. A goddess might have a special title in one region that barely appeared elsewhere. This means the myths were not static. They were alive in geography. They traveled, but they also stayed rooted. If you imagine the ancient Greek world at twilight, you might picture people moving through narrow streets after the heat of the day, carrying small lamps, hearing temple bells or festival music in the distance, and knowing that the gods were never entirely absent. Even when no prayer was spoken, the habits of reverence remained. Even when a story was not told aloud, the shapes of the gods lingered in the arrangement of space. And that perhaps is one of the loveliest facts about Greek mythology. It is full of grandeur, but it is also full of smallness. A myth can live in a storm, yes, but it can also live in a bowl of offerings, a path between fields, a carved image at a crossroads, or the quiet way someone pauses before stepping into the sea. The divine does not only arrive in thunder. Sometimes it is felt in routine. That idea carries us naturally toward the heroes, because Greek heroes are often more human than the gods, and yet more intense than ordinary people. They are caught in a world where greatness usually comes with cost, and where even the boldest name can be followed by sorrow. Greek heroes are often remembered as if they lived for glory alone, but the myths are usually more tender and more difficult than that. A hero might win honor, but at a price. A hero might become famous but not safe. A hero might return home but not unchanged. Achilles is one of the clearest examples. He is known for speed, skill, rage, grief, and a kind of terrible brilliance. In the Iliad, his story is not simply about battle. It is about what happens when pride, loss, loyalty, and mortality press against each other. Achilles is almost impossible to separate from the awareness that his life will be brief. That knowledge gives his greatness its edge. He shines because he is finite. Odysseus, by contrast, is the hero of endurance, cleverness, and return. His story is quieter in some ways, even when it is full of monsters and storms. He survives by thinking, by observing, by waiting, by speaking carefully, and by sometimes saying less than he knows. His long journey home is one of the most human things in all of Greek literature. It understands that a person can be changed not only by what they fight, but by how long they must keep going. Then there are heroes like Heracles, whose labors became famous because they are so varied. Monsters, stables, rivers, beasts, impossible tasks, all gathered into one life. He is often remembered for strength, but the myths around him also show exhaustion, service, wandering, and suffering. Heroism in this world is rarely pure. It is work under pressure and often a form of burden. Perseus carries a different kind of story. He faces the Gorgon Medusa, receives aid from divine gifts, and moves through a tale that feels half journey, half inheritance. He is part of a pattern that recurs in Greek myth where human courage is real but never entirely enough on its own. Help arrives, tools arrive, fateful conditions arrive. The hero acts inside a web that is larger than personal will. That web is important. In Greek mythology, destiny often has a shape that cannot be easily escaped. The fates, sometimes called the morai, are older than the casual authority of kings. They measure life in a way that feels patient and exact. Even gods are not always free from them. This can make the myths feel solemn, but also strangely restful. There is a structure to things, even if it is not one we would choose. Many hero stories also involve the tension between civilization and wilderness. A hero leaves home, enters danger, confronts something wild, and either returns with knowledge or fails to return at all. That pattern shows up again and again. The journey is not just a path on a map. It is a movement between the ordered world of the city and the uncertain world beyond it. The ancient Greeks valued the city, or polis, as a center of identity and civic life. So when heroes move outside it, they also cross into symbolic territory. They meet cyclopes, giants, enchantresses, sea monsters, strange island dwellers, and tests that look simple until they are not. A cave can be a trap, a feast can be dangerous, a helping hand may hide another intention. In this sense, the hero stories are not only adventurous, they are lessons in attention, but they are not cold lessons. They are full of sorrow, tenderness, and memory. The strongest scenes in many myths are not the victories, but the recognitions. A father recognizing a son, a wife recognizing a husband, a hero realizing too late what has been lost. The Greeks understood that identity can be fragile and that return itself can be a complicated event. There is something almost knightly in these stories too. A traveler at sea, a stranger at the door, a lamp left burning, a house waiting in the dark. Greek mythology often understands the human condition as a form of passage, and perhaps that is why it still feels close. We too are always moving through some version of the unknown, trying to arrive with enough of ourselves intact. And then there are the women of myth, who are sometimes treated too briefly when the stories are summarized too fast. In the slower telling, they become much more vivid. They are not ornaments around the heroes. They are forces, speakers, rulers, sufferers, protectors, and sometimes the true center of a story. Athene is one of the most admired figures in Greek mythology, and it is easy to see why. She is associated with wisdom, strategy, craft, civic order, and the city of Athens itself. She is not only clever, she is composed. She belongs to thought that has been shaped carefully, thought that can become action without losing its balance. Her symbols, the owl, the spear, the shield, give her a clear visual identity, but she is more than any single image. She is a reminder that intelligence in myth is often practical rather than merely abstract. Athene also shows how divine qualities can become civic ideals. A city might honor her because it values planning, skill, and the discipline of community life. In that sense, she is both a goddess and a mirror of what a city hopes to be. Not perfect, of course, but ordered, capable, and aware of danger. Artemis belongs to another register entirely. She is the goddess of the hunt, of wild places, of young creatures, of the moon in later tradition, and of a freedom that is not easily domesticated. She moves through the edges of the human world, forests, hills, remote streams, and places where the rules of the city loosen a little. All of these belong to her atmosphere. There is calm in Artemis, but it is not the calm of stillness. It is the calm of distance, self-possession, and watchfulness. Demeter carries the quieter but no less profound story of grain, harvest, and loss. Her myth with Persephone is one of the central seasonal stories in the Greek world. It speaks of descent and return, of grief that changes the land, of winter and spring, and of the tender bond between mother and daughter. The beauty of the story lies partly in its simplicity. A mother searches, the earth withers. Then there is a compromise, a rhythm, a recurring cycle. The myth turns the changing year into family feeling. Persephone herself is one of the most haunting figures in Greek myth. She is both girl and queen, both taken and transformed, both linked to growth and to the underworld. Her story has a deep stillness in it. It asks us to consider change not as a single event, but as a double life. One season above, one season below. One face seen by the living, another face in the quiet realm of the dead. And then there is Aphrodite, whose stories gather beauty, desire, charm, and disruption into one presence. She reminds us that love in myth is rarely simple. It can create harmony, but it can also create trouble. It can begin wars. It can reshape loyalties. It can make even divine beings act foolishly. That may be one reason she remains so memorable. Desire is one of the oldest and least orderly powers any story can hold. Hera, as queen of the gods, carries another kind of authority. Her role is often tied to marriage, lineage, and the structure of household life. Yet her myths repeatedly show how the burdens of queenship can harden into grievance, vigilance, and anger. She is not a soft emblem. She is a figure of dignity under strain. In a bedtime mood, it is worth noticing that Greek mythology rarely gives us abstract virtue. It gives us personalities under pressure. Even the younger or more minor figures can be strangely memorable. Hestia, for example, associated with the hearth, is not loud in the stories, but she matters deeply. The hearth was the center of home life, a place of warmth, continuity, and domestic order. A goddess of the hearth is almost like a meditation on stillness itself. Not every important figure needs a thunderous tale. Some matter because they hold the center quietly. In the myths, women are often shaped by conflict, but they are also agents of change. They make decisions, refuse agreements, protect their own, and endure transformation. Sometimes they are turned into constellations, trees, springs, or birds. That can sound like a loss, and often it is. But it can also be a kind of survival, a way the old stories preserved identity in a transformed form. Greek mythology is full of metamorphosis. It is one of its most characteristic patterns. A person becomes a laurel tree, a spider, a swan, a star, a flower, a stream. Change is not an exception in these stories. It is one of their main languages. The ancient imagination seemed to understand that identity is not always fixed. It can migrate into shape, into memory, into the natural world itself. That is a quiet, beautiful thought to carry into the dark. Nothing in the myth stays entirely still. The world is full of crossing points. Human to divine, life to death, city to wilderness, grief to season, body to symbol. The old stories keep opening those doors again and again, but they never rush you through them. They let you stand there, half in one room and half in another. The monsters of Greek mythology are not only there to frighten us, they often appear at the edges of the known world, where ordinary rules become less reliable. A monster may be a guardian, a punishment, a test, or a symbol of some fear the culture needed to name. In that sense, monsters are useful. They give form to unease. Medusa is perhaps one of the most famous. Her gaze turns onlookers to stone. That image is so powerful because it works on more than one level. She is terrifying, yes, but she is also associated with transformation, with a kind of frozen visibility, with the danger of looking too directly at what should not be met without protection. Over time, Medusa became a figure who could be read in many ways, as victim, threat, warning, or emblem. Greek myth often leaves room for that kind of layered meaning. The Minotaur lives in another very memorable space, the labyrinth. The image of a maze beneath a palace with a creature at its center has lasted because it feels both architectural and psychological. A labyrinth is a place where direction becomes uncertain. It asks for patience, memory, thread, and courage. The Minotaur, half human and half bull, belongs to that strange middle space where identity is divided. The story of Theseus and the labyrinth is not only a tale of monster slaying, it is also a tale about entering confusion and finding a path out. Cyclopes, giants, harpies, sphinxes, sirens, centaurs, hydras, these figures populate Greek mythology like weather systems of the mind. Some are singular, some plural, some monstrous, some seductive, some tragic. The sirens in particular are fascinating because their danger comes through beauty and song. Their threat is not brute force, it is attention itself. They call the listener into danger. That is one reason the image remains so vivid. It understands the vulnerability of hearing. Centaurs are often shown as creatures of mixed nature, half human and half horse, and they can represent the tension between refinement and impulse. Some are wild, some wiser. Chiron, the noble centaur, stands out because he breaks the pattern a little. He is a teacher, healer, and guide. He reminds us that even the mythic categories are not rigid. A creature associated with wildness can also embody care. The edges of the world were especially important in ancient imagination. Faraway islands, caves, underworld entrances, sea cliffs, and borderlands all created the feeling that the known world was only a thin circle around a larger, stranger reality. Heroes travel to these places, but not often lightly. There is usually a cost, a caution, a warning, perhaps a bit of luck. One can think of the underworld itself as one of the great edge spaces in Greek myth. It is not always described in the same way, and it is not merely a place of punishment. It is the realm of the dead, a necessary destination, a solemn landscape of shades, rivers, gates, judges, and memory. Hades, as a god and as a realm, was not simply a villain in the old stories. He was part of the structure of existence. Death was not outside the system, it was inside it. That can seem dark, but it can also be calming in a strange way. The ancient Greeks gave death a geography. They gave it order. They imagined pathways, ferries, boundaries, and names. Human beings have always tried to do this, perhaps because the unknown becomes a little more bearable when it can be pictured. The river Styx is one of those names that has travelled far beyond its original setting. Oaths sworn by the Styx carried great weight in myth. This tells us something important. Even in the underworld, the Greeks imagined law. There was structure beyond life, and that structure mattered. At times, these tales are not far from dreams. A dream can have the same strange logic. A face changes, a road turns to water, a house contains a forest, a voice arrives before the person who speaks it. Greek mythology is full of this kind of dream logic. No wonder it has remained so fertile for poets, painters, and storytellers. It gives language to things that feel almost remembered rather than invented. And if you are listening at night, perhaps that is part of the comfort. The monsters are old. They have names. They have shapes. They move through stories that have already been told many times. The edges are dark, but they are not empty. They are populated, mapped, and strangely familiar. The Greek underworld is one of the most enduring parts of myth because it feels both distant and intimate. It is a place of endings, certainly, but also of memory, judgment, and continuing existence in altered form. The dead do not simply vanish from the imagination. They remain arranged in a landscape with rivers, gates, fields, shadows, and rulers. Hades, the god, is often misunderstood by later retellings. He is not always the frightening antagonist popular culture makes him seem. In the mythic world, he is stern, inevitable, and deeply linked to the order of death. His realm is not a place of chaos. It is a place of permanence. That distinction matters. The underworld is not a wild forest. It is a necessary destination, and the stories treat it with a mixture of fear and seriousness. One of the most famous journeys to the underworld is Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus, the musician, descends in an attempt to bring back the woman he loves. It is a story of longing so intense that it crosses the boundary between life and death. The result is heartbreaking, but the mood of the story is softer than many tragedies. It is about trust, hesitation, and the impossible wish to turn back and see once more. The moment of looking back is so small, and yet it changes everything. There is a peculiar hush around stories like this. They are not only dramatic, they are reflective. They ask what memory can do and what it cannot do. They ask whether love can cross every boundary, or whether some boundaries remain no matter how beautiful the music is. Orpheus is one of the clearest examples of how myth turns emotion into geography. A song becomes a path. A warning becomes a doorway. A glance becomes fate. The Greeks also imagined different destinations for the dead. Some souls were thought to drift in shadow, some to find reward, some to face punishment, and some to dwell in the quiet neutrality of the underworld's broader landscape. Over time, Greek thought about the afterlife changed and diversified. Philosophers and mystery cults offered their own interpretations. This is worth remembering because it shows that even a realm as solemn as the underworld was not fixed in a single form. The Eleusinian mysteries, for example, centered on Demeter and Persephone and carried themes of death, loss, return, and hope. The details were carefully guarded in antiquity, which only increased their power. We know that they mattered enormously, but we do not know every part of what participants experienced. That partial silence itself is meaningful. Some sacred things were not meant to be described in full daylight. Greek mythology often circles around the idea that death is not a simple wall but a passage. That does not make it easy, and the stories never pretend that it is easy, but they do make it imaginable. And in myth, to imagine something is already to bring it a little closer to speech. A bedtime listener may find this strangely peaceful. The underworld in the myths is not cheerful, but it is ordered. It is held within a larger moral and cosmic structure. The river flows, the gates stand, the dead are remembered, the living make offerings. Life continues above, and the stories preserve the bridge between them. There is also the matter of heroes descending and returning. Their journeys to the underworld or near it mark them as exceptional but not invulnerable. They are allowed to glimpse the border, not cross it carelessly. That boundary between life and death gives the myths some of their deepest gravity. The stories may be full of gods and monsters, yet at their center lies the simple fact that people wondered what remained when a life ended. And so the underworld becomes not just a place in a story, but a shape for human uncertainty. What happens after? Who remembers us? What names are kept? What music reaches the dark? Greek mythology does not answer all of these questions neatly. It simply keeps them close and allows them to resonate. That resonance is one of the reasons these stories still settle so well into a quiet night. They are old enough to feel distant and intimate enough to feel personal. They make room for sorrow without rushing it away. They make room for memory and for the soft persistence of the things we cannot fully hold. Greek mythology is often remembered as a world of gods and heroes, but it is also a world of places. Not just symbolic places, but actual cities, hills, coastlines, sanctuaries, groves, and islands that acquired meaning through story. The landscape itself became a kind of archive. Athens is one of the clearest examples. Its identity became deeply connected with Athene, and the relationship between city and goddess helped shape both political imagination and sacred practice. The Acropolis was not only an impressive high place, it was a center of civic memory, religious life, and artistic achievement. When we think of mythic Greece, we are often thinking of cities that preserved their stories in stone, ritual, and architecture. Delphi, too, was a place where myth, religion, and geography met. Set on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, it became one of the most important sanctuaries in the ancient world. Pilgrims and envoys came for guidance, offerings, and sacred authority. The site gathered prestige because it seemed to stand at the center of a meaningful map. Ancient people often treated such places not as isolated monuments, but as points where the world became especially legible. Delos, another name worth lingering on, was associated with Apollo and Artemis. It was a sacred island in the Aegean, and its significance shows how islands could become more than land surrounded by water. They could become divine birthplaces, sanctuaries, and ceremonial anchors in the sea. In a world of sailing routes, such places mattered not only spiritually, but practically. They offered rest, orientation, and a sense that the waters had recognizable landmarks in them. The coastlines of Greece themselves helped shape mythic imagination. A sailor's world is a world of delays, arrivals, storms, ports, and uncertain weather. Poseidon belongs to that atmosphere entirely. He is not simply the god of the sea as a scenic backdrop. He is the reminder that the sea can change a day, a route, a fate. That kind of power naturally entered the stories. There are also mountain spaces, some sacred, some remote, some thought to be inhabited by nymphs or divine presences. Mounts in myth are often thresholds. Olympus, Parnassus, Ida, and others appear as elevated places where ordinary life is somehow thinned out. Mountains have always invited symbolic thinking. They stand apart, they gather cloud, and they seem to hold hidden air. The ancient Greeks did not separate environment from meaning as sharply as many modern people do in daily life. A grove could be sacred because a deity was believed to dwell there. A spring could be the source of both water and story. A cave could be a birthplace, a hiding place, an entrance, or a warning. The physical world was never just physical. That helps explain why Greek myth has inspired so many artists. A painted vase, a marble relief, a coin, a temple frieze, all could carry a scene from legend. The stories were not locked in books alone. They moved into objects, into homes, into civic spaces, into the visual language of an entire culture. A myth could be recognized in a glance. There is a quiet pleasure in imagining these objects by candleless daylight, their surfaces worn by handling, their images slightly softened by time. The myths on them are not frozen. They were once part of lived surroundings, touched by hands that knew the stories and perhaps told them again over meals, at festivals, or while walking home through the evening streets. And because the landscape and the stories were so closely linked, the ancient Greek world feels less like a faraway stage set and more like a living pattern of attention. A city remembers its goddess, a hill remembers a god, an island remembers a birth, a cave remembers a concealment, a harbour remembers a departure. The world keeps the marks of what happened in it. That is a calming thought to hold for a while. The land remembers, the stones remember. The sea remembers in its own way by repeating tides and roots and storms. Greek mythology lives inside that remembering, and perhaps that is why it still feels so near, even after so many centuries. One of the most characteristic features of Greek mythology is transformation. So many stories end not with a neat conclusion, but with a change of form. A mortal becomes a constellation. A grieving figure becomes a tree. A woman becomes a bird, a flower, a spring, a star. The world of myth is full of these irreversible crossings. At first, transformation can seem like punishment, and sometimes it is. A story warns against pride, cruelty, or disrespect, and the outcome is a new shape that reflects the offense. But metamorphosis is not always only punishment. It can also be preservation. The body changes, yet memory survives in another form. The name remains. The story remembers what the eye no longer sees. Daphne's transformation into a laurel tree, for instance, is one of those myths that can be read with sadness and care. Pursuit turns to stillness. Human motion becomes rootedness. The laurel then carries Apollo's association with it, and the tree becomes a symbol of his honor. In that moment, the myth links desire, escape, and sacred emblem all at once. Arachne, changed into a spider, carries a different lesson. Her story concerns skill, pride, and competition with divine authority, but it also preserves the art of weaving as a powerful human achievement. The spider is not just a creature of fear. In the mythic imagination, it is a reminder of craftsmanship, thread, pattern, and the persistence of making. Niobe, turned to stone or preserved in a state of perpetual grief depending on the version, becomes an image of sorrow that cannot move. Her punishment is related to pride, but the emotional center of the story is lost beyond speech. The figure who grieves too much or too openly is changed into an emblem of grief itself. That is a hauntingly human idea. Emotion hardens into form. There are many such stories. Some involve nymphs disappearing into waters or woods. Some involve mortals elevated among the stars. Some involve divine beings disguising themselves as animals or people, then revealing their true form at a crucial moment. Shape is never final. A figure may be one thing in one scene and another in the next. This mobility makes the myths feel almost musical. A theme appears, changes key, returns in a new register. The old storytellers seemed comfortable with recurrence and variation. They did not need every story to be uniform. They knew that meaning often deepens through difference. Perhaps this is part of why Greek mythology has traveled so well through later literature. Poets could revisit the same figures and see them differently. Painters could linger on one instant of transformation. Philosophers could use the myths to think about identity, fate, and change. The stories remain open because they are not merely plots. They are structures of feeling, and in a quiet night that can be comforting. Change does not always arrive as catastrophe. Sometimes it arrives as a shift of light, a new season, a different distance, a memory becoming clearer or blurrier. Greek myth understood that transformation is everywhere. It happens in the body, in the city, in the year, in the sky, and in the heart. Even the stars in many tales are not fixed in the same way we might assume. Constellations could be explained as figures placed among the heavens after extraordinary lives or dramatic events. Sky itself becomes a memory palace. Above the human world, the myths continue, quiet and shining. That image is a gentle one to rest with, a universe where change does not erase meaning, but often carries it somewhere else. A world where a lost voice can become a tree, a pattern, a star, or a name that people still speak after many generations. Greek mythology is full of endings, yes, but its endings are rarely simple emptiness. They are transitions, and sometimes they are forms of survival. Greek mythology did not come to later generations only through temples and statues. It also came through poetry. This matters enormously. The stories were preserved, reshaped, and expanded by poets who gave them rhythm, sequence, dialogue, and emotional weight. In a culture where much was transmitted orally before being written down, poetry was not decorative. It was a vessel of memory. Homer is among the most famous names here, though he may stand as a figure for a tradition rather than a single clearly known person. The Iliad and the Odyssey are foundational texts in the long history of Greek myth because they helped fix many divine and heroic figures into forms that later readers would recognize. Yet even these poems were part of a larger world of telling and retelling. They did not invent everything. They selected, arranged, and elevated. The Homeric gods are vivid because they are so involved in human affairs. They argue over war, protect favorites, cause delays, send signs, and intervene in the balance of events. They can be majestic, but also petty, amused, irritated, or surprisingly tender. That human scale applied to divine beings is one of the most distinctive pleasures of Greek myth. Hesiod offers another crucial voice. His works, especially the Theogony and Works and Days, help organize divine genealogy and cosmic order. If Homer gives us the gods in motion within stories, Hesiod gives us a kind of map of how the divine family and world structure came to be. That distinction is useful because Greek mythology is not one style of storytelling. It has epic, hymn, tragedy, genealogy, local legend, and ritual memory all braided together. Tragedy, too, became one of the great homes of myth. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides drew on older tales and gave them new emotional force. In the theatre, myths could become deeply human. A story known for generations could suddenly feel intimate, immediate, and morally complicated. The stage turned old legend into living argument. That is one of the remarkable things about Greek mythology. It did not stay in one medium. It moved from oral recitation to lyric, from epic to sculpture, from vase painting to drama, from local custom to later philosophical reflection. It survived because it was adaptable. A story could change without losing its core shape. There is also a practical reason for this endurance. Myths are memorable. They often have clear images, strong names, and repeated patterns. A dangerous journey, a forbidden look, a divine disguise, a family curse, a transformation, a return. These are structures the mind can hold even when details drift. That is perhaps why bedtime is such a fitting time for them. The mind at night likes patterns that are gentle enough to float but distinct enough to follow. Mythology offers just that. It is not a textbook. It is not a lecture. It is a long trail of remembered images, some bright, some solemn, all connected by old human curiosity. And of course, the myths continue to evolve after the classical period. Roman writers adapted them. Later artists reimagined them. Modern storytellers still borrow their shapes. Even when a god changes name or setting, the old patterns remain visible, like a drawing underneath a newer painting. This continuity is one of the most comforting facts about myth. It tells us that stories can live a very long time if they keep returning to something human and recognizable. Love, grief, power, travel, home, loss, pride, wisdom, these are old subjects, and Greek mythology approaches them from many angles. That is why it has never really felt finished. A story survives not because it remains unchanged, but because each generation finds a way to hear itself in it. And the Greeks, with their poets and singers and dramatists, gave the world a great archive of such hearing. Their stories keep speaking because they were always meant to be spoken aloud. There are many small facts about Greek mythology that do not always appear in the dramatic retelling, but they add texture to the whole world. For one thing, the Greeks did not all worship the same way in every place. Local custom mattered a great deal. The same god could have different epithets or titles, depending on the city or sanctuary. Athene might be honored in one form as protectress of the city, and in another as guardian of crafts or battle strategy. This flexibility helped the gods remain relevant in different settings. Another quiet point is that myth and cult could influence each other in both directions. A ritual might preserve an old story, while a story might explain a ritual. Over time, the two could become intertwined so closely that it becomes difficult to separate them cleanly. That is not a problem. It is part of the richness. Children, families, and genealogy are everywhere in Greek myth because the old stories cared deeply about lineage, who descended from whom, Which house was cursed? Which marriage created a political bond? Which child fulfilled a prophecy? These concerns may seem melodramatic from a distance, but they also reflect a world where family identity and inheritance carried enormous weight. The gods themselves often resembled large, complicated households. There are rivalries, alliances, parentage disputes, and generational tensions. One god can emerge from another's body or head in a way that feels both miraculous and symbolic. Athene's birth from Zeus, for example, is one of the most famous divine births in myth, and it is remembered partly because it is so unusual. The gods are never ordinary families, yet they are family-shaped enough to feel familiar. Greek mythology also uses geography symbolically in ways that are easy to miss if one rushes. A remote island may signal isolation. A mountain may signal nearness to heaven or divine power. A cave may signal hidden beginnings. A river may divide worlds. A crossroads may imply choice, uncertainty, or encounter. These landscapes are not just scenery, they are meaning made visible. Another gentle fact is that some myths are astonishingly old in their roots, older than the literary versions we usually know. They may preserve elements from Bronze Age memory, regional cult practice, or even older Indo-European patterns, yet they were reshaped so thoroughly over time that it is best to think of them as living inheritances rather than fossils. They are old, yes, but they were always being revised by the people who told them. That revision continued in the hands of artists. A vase painter might choose one instant from a larger tale. A sculptor might freeze a pose that suggests the rest. A poet might expand a side character into a more tragic figure. A community might emphasize the local version of a myth because it honored a sacred place nearby. The mythology was never merely an archive. It was a working, active cultural language. And one final quiet detail for tonight, perhaps: many Greek myths are not really about heroes winning. They are about what people do with what cannot be changed. A god has acted. A fate has been spoken. A boundary has been crossed. A person must continue. That posture of continuing is one of the oldest human movements in storytelling. So even as the stories contain thunder, monsters, and impossible tasks, they also contain patience, waiting for a sign, traveling the long road home, mourning and remembering, making offerings, listening for an answer that may come in a dream or a bird or a line of verse. Greek mythology is full of motion, but it is also full of stillness inside motion. That balance is part of what makes it so suited to a quiet evening. There is enough wonder to hold the mind and enough repetition to soften it. The myths can keep company without demanding too much. They can sit beside you like an old volume on a bedside table, open to any page, always ready to be read again. As we come to the end of tonight's slow walk through Greek mythology, it may be enough simply to let the names remain in the mind for a little while. Zeus and Hera, Athene and Artemis, Demeter and Persephone, Hermes, Apollo, Poseidon, Hades, heroes, monsters, poets, islands, temples, forests, rivers, and the long shadow of the underworld. These stories survived because they were never only stories. They were ways of understanding the world and also ways of living in it. They gave shape to places, to seasons, to dangers, to hopes, to grief, and to the quiet idea that even the most distant things can still feel near when they are spoken of with care. So let the night stay soft around you. Let the old tales drift a little farther away while their images rest calmly in the background. A mountain in cloud, a sea at dusk, a doorway into shadow, a song crossing silence, a goddess watching over a city, a hero finding the road home. And now, as the story grows quieter, you can simply remain here in this calm space between waking and sleep, where the myths are still present but very gentle, and the room is peaceful, and nothing more is required. There is something especially restful about the fact that Greek mythology is never sealed off from the ordinary world. It keeps touching it. A field is not just a field when Demeter has blessed the grain. A grove is not just a grove when it is watched by nymphs. A spring may be remembered because someone once encountered a god there. A village road may be quiet in the present and yet still carry an older kind of attention, as if the land itself remembers being named by story. And that sense of remembered place gives the myths a soft depth. Even when the gods are distant, their world remains layered with traces. There are old altars under newer stones. There are sanctuaries built where people felt the air was different. There are cities that claimed a divine ancestor and carried that claim for generations. A family line might be told beside a fire with the same seriousness as history, because in the Greek imagination, ancestry and myth often overlap in a way that feels both intimate and vast. Many of the gods also began as local presences before becoming widely known figures. Athene was not merely a goddess of wisdom in the abstract. She was a protector of craft, strategy, and the ordered life of the city. Artemis was not only a moonlit huntress in later art, she was deeply bound to wildness, thresholds, births, and the safety of young creatures. Poseidon was not just a sea god, he was also a force of earthquakes, horses, and the unstable power beneath the ground. Their identities were wide enough to contain different regions of experience, and that made them feel enduring rather than fixed. It is also quietly interesting that so many Greek myths revolve around transitions. Childhood becoming adulthood, wilderness becoming settlement, sorrow becoming ritual, loss becoming a seasonal pattern. The Greeks lived in a world where change had to be negotiated carefully because the boundary between safety and danger could feel thin. So myths often linger on the moments in between, the times when one state has ended but the next has not fully arrived. Think of Persephone moving between underworld and earth. Think of Odysseus moving between war and home. Think of heroes crossing from the known coast into islands of uncertainty. Think of young figures who stand at the edge of a new role, not fully one thing and not yet another. The stories are often most attentive to these thresholds because thresholds are where life feels most human. And in a very calm way, the ancient Greeks were interested in how much of life is governed by patterns larger than desire. The fates are one expression of this. The more I spin, measure, and cut the thread of life, a very old image that suggests a universe in which order exists but not always mercy. It is a sobering idea, yet also strangely restful in a literary sense, because it gives shape to uncertainty. There is something comforting, in a quiet old story way, about knowing that human beings have long tried to imagine the outline of what cannot be controlled. The underworld, too, is not only a place of punishment or dread. In Greek myth, it is a destination of memory. It is where shades dwell, where names are preserved, where some stories insist that only a faint version of life remains. But even there, the myths do not always speak with one voice. Some heroes travel there and return, some souls are punished, some are rewarded, some are simply there almost like fading reflections. This ambiguity can be unsettling, but it also creates a kind of stillness. The underworld is not a spectacle. It is a pause in the story, a deep quiet beneath the noise of the living world. That quiet was likely one reason Greek religion often felt so local and practical. People did not only ask what was true in an abstract sense, they asked how to live near the divine in a particular place, at a particular time, with a particular family, in a particular season. A sacrifice, a festival, a hymn, a libation, a prayer at sunrise or dusk. These were not grand theatrical gestures, so much as regular forms of attention. And attention in ancient life was a kind of devotion. Even the gods themselves sometimes seem defined by attention. Athene notices craftsmanship and strategy. Hermes notices thresholds, roads, travelers, and messages. Apollo notices prophecy, music, and sudden clarity. Artemis notices the forest edge and the lives that move through it. Dionysus notices the unraveling of ordinary boundaries. Each divinity, in a sense, is a form of seeing. The myths teach that the world contains many ways of being perceived. If we linger for a moment with Hermes, he becomes a particularly gentle figure for a sleepy hour. He is a messenger, yes, but also a guide between states. He escorts souls. He travels freely. He moves through borders that others cannot cross as easily. In one story he is a trickster, in another a helper, in another a civilizing force that brings exchange and communication. He belongs to movement itself, and perhaps that is why he feels so alive in a mythology built from roads, ports, markets, and conversations. And then there is Apollo, whose presence in Greek myth often feels bright, ordered, and distant, like sunlight on stone. Yet Apollo is not only serene. He is also associated with plague, punishment, warning, and the difficult gift of prophecy. The oracle at Delphi is one of the most famous centers of his worship, and Delphi itself is one of those places that seems almost designed to invite contemplation. Set on a mountainside, once considered the navel of the world, it was a site of sacred consultation for centuries. Even now, the ruins have a hush about them. A place can be famous and still remain quiet. Delphi is only one of many ancient sanctuaries whose remains seem to carry a particular stillness. Olympia, where games and ritual once intertwined. Eleusis, where the secretive mysteries of Demeter and Persephone shaped generations of religious life. Dodona, with its sacred oak and the sound of wind interpreted as divine speech. Each site was part of a geography of meaning. Stone and tree and spring and altar formed a map of attention across the Greek world. The Eleusinian mysteries in particular continue to feel beautifully mysterious because so much about them was deliberately hidden. Initiates came seeking something concerning life, death, and renewal, but the exact details remain veiled. This uncertainty has preserved their atmosphere. In the absence of certainty, imagination grows quiet and attentive. We know that people traveled to Eleusis for rites connected to grief and hope. We know that the rites were among the most important in the Greek religious calendar. We know that silence guarded them. Sometimes that is enough to make a place feel even more profound. Mystery is one of the most enduring features of Greek mythology. Not every story is an explanation. Some are simply an acknowledgement that the world contains things beyond direct understanding. A strange birth, a prophetic warning, a transformation, a curse, a sign interpreted after the fact, a god appearing in disguise. These are not only narrative devices, they are expressions of how ancient people experienced uncertainty. The world was full of meaning, but meaning was not always obvious. That is perhaps why omens mattered so much. Birds, dreams, thunder, entrails, unusual light, sudden silence. A person in the ancient world might look for signs with a seriousness that feels almost meditative now. The landscape was not mute, it could speak indirectly. A myth often records the result of someone listening too carefully or not carefully enough, and in that tension lies much of the human drama. There is also a lovely continuity in how Greek myths preserve older pagan landscapes even after the classical period passed. Rivers remain divine, mountains remain inhabited by stories, trees retain memory, springs continue to be associated with nymphs. Some caves become sites of later Christian reverence, while others simply persist as places people avoid or revere for reasons they can no longer fully name. The ancient world does not vanish all at once. It lingers in layers. This is true of the myths themselves as well. A figure like Heracles is both an extraordinary hero and an enduring symbolic presence. He performs impossible labors, yes, but his stories also keep returning to exhaustion, grief, punishment, exile, and eventual release. He is not a perfect hero. He is a burdened one. That makes him memorable. His strength is vast, but so is the cost of it. In the oldest stories, greatness is rarely simple. It carries weight. And so does the story of Theseus, whose later legend became associated with Athens and civic identity. He is the slayer of the Minotaur, the unifier of communities, and also a figure whose myths contain ambiguity, abandonment, and political reworking. Mythic heroes often become mirrors for the societies that claim them. Their deeds are adjusted to fit cultural memory. Their flaws are edited or emphasized depending on the lesson being told. In this way, the heroes continue to evolve long after their supposed adventures. The Minotaur's labyrinth is another of those images that seems to rest in the mind almost by itself, a structure built to contain what cannot be safely seen, a maze beneath a palace, a kingdom with a hidden terror at its center. The labyrinth may have roots in older Aegean palace cultures, perhaps even in distant memory of real architectural complexity at Knossos, though the myth transforms history into symbol. Whatever its origin, the labyrinth remains one of the most enduring images of entrapment and uncertainty in world literature, and it is curious how often Greek mythology turns architectural spaces into emotional states. A palace may become a site of betrayal, a cave may become a birthplace, a tower may signal confinement, a threshold may hold power, a tomb may become a point of heroic memory. Ancient storytellers understood that built spaces carry meaning, they shape behavior, they shelter and exclude, they remember. In myth, buildings are rarely just buildings. The same is true of ships. Greek myth and Greek history both know the sea as a road and a danger. The sea connects islands, carries armies, brings merchants, and makes home feel far away. It is not surprising that so many myths involve voyages. Jason and the Argo, Odysseus on his long return, Menelaus and the aftermath of war, Aeneas in the Roman continuation of Greek mythic worlds, moving through the same broad cultural imagination. The voyage is one of the oldest narrative forms because it mirrors the human condition so closely. We begin somewhere, we are carried elsewhere. We try to return or adapt or both. The Argonauts themselves form a kind of traveling fellowship, each figure bringing a different talent or lineage to the ship. Their journey is not only about the Golden Fleece, it is about the assembling of a temporary world, a fragile cooperation among different kinds of courage. Some myths are like that. They are less about the object sought than about the company kept on the way. And perhaps because the sea was so central to Greek life, storms in myth often feel especially vivid. The gods can be distant, but the weather is immediate. Winds can delay, scatter, or destroy. A favorable breeze can alter a fate. Poseidon's displeasure is not abstract. It is felt in waves and wreckage. For people whose lives were shaped by sailing, coastal travel, trade, and fishing, the sea was never only scenic. It was a presence with moods. To tell stories about it was to acknowledge its power. At the same time, Greek mythology never forgets the small domestic sphere. There are stories of weaving, of household honor, of hospitality, of daughters and mothers, of the quiet rituals by which life continues. Penelope waiting by her loom is one of the most moving images in literature because it turns patience into a form of intelligence. She does not conquer by force. She endures by wit, restraint, and continuity. Her story is not loud, but it is immensely strong. Hospitality, or xenia, is another deeply important quiet theme. In the ancient Greek world, the guest-host relationship could be sacred. To receive someone well was not merely polite, it was a social and religious obligation. Many myths test this principle. Some households welcome strangers who turn out to be gods in disguise. Others fail to honor the bond and suffer for it. These stories remind us that civility was never trivial. It was one of the foundations of moral order. Sometimes myth takes the shape of warning through beauty. Sirens sing, nymphs enchant, gardens tempt. A lovely thing may conceal danger, or danger may arrive in lovely form. This is a very old literary pattern, but Greek mythology uses it with special grace. It does not need to shout that the world is dangerous. It simply lets the danger and the beauty sit together. That balance gives the stories their particular atmosphere. They are not harsh, they are attentive. The same atmosphere can be found in many of the lesser-known figures who move through these tales. The river gods with their changing currents, the sea nymphs, the minor deities of sleep, dreams, dawn, and twilight. Hypnos, who is sleep itself. Thanatos, who is death in a gentler, more personified guise than many later traditions allow. Eos, the rosy-fingered dawn, who arrives again and again in Homeric language as a renewed beginning. These figures may not dominate the most familiar myths, but they deepen the texture of the whole. They remind us that the Greeks imagined divinity not just in storms and kings, but in transitions, moods, and states of consciousness. Dreams, in particular, occupy a fascinating place. In Greek literature, dreams can be messages from gods, shadows of desire, warnings, or fabrications. They are not always reliable, but they are always meaningful. The dream world is a borderland like the sea or the underworld, a place where certainty loosens. For a bedtime narration, that feels especially fitting. Sleep itself resembles a mythic threshold. One slips from the obvious world into a quieter region where images come and go, just as in the stories. And perhaps that is why ancient myths continue to feel near at night. Their logic is often dreamlike but not random. It is shaped by repetition, symbol, and memory. A person changes into a tree, a bird, a stone, a stream. A god arrives as an animal. A punishment becomes a landscape. A grief becomes a ritual. The transformations are strange, but they are also simple in their emotional truth. Loss does alter the world. Love does alter the world. Fear does alter the world. Myth gives those alterations form. A good example is Daphne, who flees Apollo and becomes a laurel tree. The story is often remembered as a tragic chase, but it is also a story about how escape can lead to permanence in another mode. The laurel remains sacred to Apollo. The nymph becomes tree. The human form is gone, but memory persists in leaves. Greek myth is full of such bittersweet survivals. It rarely lets a transformation be only ending or only beginning. Or consider Narcissus, whose story has echoed through centuries because it captures a human tendency that remains recognizable, the danger of becoming too enclosed within one's own reflection. Yet the older myth may not have been simply about vanity in the modern sense. It may also have been about misrecognition, desire, and the pain of loving what cannot answer back. The pool in the story is quiet. The silence around it matters. A myth can be psychologically precise without ever sounding clinical. The same is true of Echo, who is reduced to voice and repetition. Her fate is haunting because it turns communication into absence. She can speak but not begin. She can answer but not fully. In the landscape of Greek myth, this kind of partial existence appears often. A person is diminished, dispersed, or remembered in fragments. The result can be sorrowful, but also strangely beautiful, as though the story itself has learned how to echo. There are so many other figures who live in the margins of the major tales. The grey-haired Gree, sharing one eye and one tooth among them. The Furies, ancient agents of justice and vengeance. The Hesperides, guardians of a far western garden. The Erinyes, who turn guilt into pursuit. The Centaurs, hybrid beings associated with rawness and excess, yet not without wisdom in some cases. Each group gives the myths another texture. They are like the weather systems of story, shaping mood, even when they are not the main focus. The ancient Greeks also loved to anchor myth in real or half-real genealogies. A city claimed descent from a hero. A family traced itself to a god. A region said it had once been blessed or ruled by a divine-born founder. This practice turns identity into narrative and narrative into belonging. It is one of the reasons the myths feel so woven into civic life. They were not separate from community memory. They helped structure it. At the same time, Greek myth was not one unified book. It was a constellation of local traditions, poets, cults, dialects, and periods. Homer's world differs from Hesiod's. Tragedians reinterpret older tales. Later mythographers try to organize what earlier poetry left fluid. Roman writers adopt Greek material and reshape it for their own world. Hellenistic scholars preserve and systematize. The result is a tradition that feels both coherent and open-ended. It grows by variation. That variation is especially visible in the gods' personalities. In one tale, a deity may be nurturing, in another severe. One version may emphasize mercy, another vengeance. This is not a flaw in the tradition. It is part of its realism. Human experience itself is variable. So a god of war can also belong to strategy. A goddess of love can also bring trouble. A god of the sun can also see hidden things. The myths allow many facets to coexist, and there is something soothing about that refusal to simplify. Modern life often presses for neat labels, but myth prefers depth and contradiction. A figure can be both a giver and a taker, both protector and threat, both beautiful and dangerous. To inhabit such complexity is very human. It is also quietly freeing. It means the stories do not need to settle too quickly. They can remain alive in their uncertainty. Greek mythology also has a profound relationship with art and performance. Epic poetry was recited aloud, tragedies were staged before civic audiences, hymns were sung in ritual contexts, vase scenes captured moments from stories known by listeners who could fill in the rest. Each medium changed the myth slightly. A song stretches time, a play focuses conflict, a painted image leaves silence around a gesture. The myths therefore lived in many forms at once, never entirely fixed to one. This is one reason they have traveled so easily across centuries. They were always adaptable. A medieval reader could interpret them allegorically. A Renaissance artist could rediscover them aesthetically. A modern novelist could use them psychologically. A filmmaker could make them visual. A scholar could examine their ritual roots. A quiet listener at night can receive them as atmosphere and memory. The old stories are surprisingly generous in how they meet each age. There are also practical ancient details that can make the world feel especially vivid without becoming loud. Olive oil was precious, central to daily life, ritual, cooking, and athletics. Laurel crowned victors and honored Apollo. Wine marked celebration, hospitality, and the dangerous loosening of restraint. Bronze tools, stone temples, woven cloth, pottery, and incense all formed the physical texture around which myths circulated. The gods were imagined in relation to these materials because the materials shaped life itself. Pottery, especially, offers a very calm way to think about myth. A painted amphora or crater might show a single moment from a familiar story. The image is still. The linework is deliberate. The scene may include named figures or only identifying gestures. Because pottery was used in ordinary life, these narratives entered daily routines. Myth was not reserved for temples and poems. It could rest on a shelf, hold wine, or accompany a meal. That is a lovely thought at night, the ancient world carrying its stories in useful objects. And beneath all of it lies the oldest and perhaps most peaceful truth of Greek mythology, that human beings have always needed ways to speak about what surpasses them. Whether death, birth, love, memory, power, distance, time, the myths do this by personifying, localizing, and narrating what would otherwise remain formless. They make the world imaginable, not necessarily simple, but imaginable. This is why so many myths feel like weathered stones along a path. You pass them again and again. You know their rough shape, yet each time, if you are quiet enough, they reveal another side. A forgotten name, a regional variant, a sorrow hidden in the margins, a god with an unexpected tenderness, a monster that may once have been sacred, a hero whose triumph costs more than it saves. The stories do not hurry, they keep their own pace. There is even a quiet kind of mercy in how often Greek myth preserves failed endings. Not everything is resolved cleanly, not every wound heals, not every journey ends in celebration, and yet the stories continue. The world persists. A city rises after destruction, a ritual follows loss, a season returns, a child is born, a song is remembered. This cyclical movement, so present in myths of Demeter and Persephone, reflects an agricultural understanding of life, but it also resonates emotionally. Human beings know recurrence. We know that sorrow can return, and so can warmth. The ancient festivals of the Greek world often honored this recurrence. They marked planting, harvest, transition, and civic life. Processions, sacrifices, competitions, and communal meals helped communities feel joined to cosmic rhythm. Myth and festival reinforced one another. A story was not only told, it was enacted in time. That may be one reason Greek mythology feels so embodied. It belongs to seasons, bodies, voices, offerings, and the slowly changing year. When we think about the ruins that remain from that world, it is worth remembering how much has vanished. Paint on sculpture faded. Wooden structures decayed, entire libraries were lost, local cults disappeared, names survived in fragments, inscriptions weathered. Yet even in ruin, the ancient Greek world retains a great dignity. Broken columns against the sky, steps worn by feet long gone, a carved inscription half legible in sun and dust. These remains do not shout, they persist, and perhaps persistence is one of the deepest themes in the mythology as a whole. Not triumph, not conquest, but persistence. The story that survives oral transmission, the city that remembers its founder, the goddess whose cult continues through changing centuries, the hero whose labors are retold in new settings, the underworld that remains beyond the hill, the mountain that still catches dawn, the sea that still receives the ships. The names continue. Names matter so much in Greek myth because naming is a kind of knowing. To know the name of a place, a god, a nymph, a monster, or a hero is to place it within a tradition of memory. Many myths explain names. They tell why a city is called what it is, why a cliff bears a certain title, why a spring commemorates a loss. Etymology and story often mingle. In that way, language itself becomes a landscape. And when language becomes a landscape, bedtime becomes an especially good time to wander it. The mind can move without urgency. A temple on a hill, a harbour at evening, a forest where a huntress passes quietly between trees, a palace lit from within, a cave with a hidden echo, a road leading toward a far-off shrine, a field where grain bends in the wind, a shore where an old hero finally looks homeward. All of these images belong to Greek mythology, but they also belong to human imagination more broadly. That may be why the myths feel so enduring. They are ancient, yet they speak in forms that remain legible. They know about longing and duty, about fear and reverence, about transformation and return. They know that the world is both beautiful and difficult, and that to live in it is to keep learning how to notice. So if the evening grows even quieter now, let it be quiet in the manner of old stone at dusk. Let the story settle softly, not as lessons that must be mastered, but as presences that can simply remain nearby. A goddess in a sheltered grove, a messenger on a road, a lost child in a seasonal tale, a ship far out on calm water, a city under stars, a mountain still holding its ancient name. And if sleep comes gradually, let it come the way many myths do, by degrees through thresholds and half-light. Let thought loosen gently. Let the old stories keep their places without asking anything more. Let the names drift like leaves on still water. Let the sea be calm. Let the night be deep and kind. Let the world of gods and heroes rest for a while in silence. And now, as all of it becomes softer still, there is nothing further to seek. Only the enduring hush of the old tales, the patient earth beneath them, and the quiet sense that every ending is also a resting place. But even resting places in Greek mythology often carry another layer of story, another almost hidden memory beneath the surface. A tomb might mark not only death but lineage. A spring might be tied to grief and then to cleansing. A cave might be a birthplace, a hiding place, a shrine, or an entrance to the unseen. The same setting can hold several meanings at once, and that layered quality gives the myths a particular depth. Nothing is only one thing. A mountain is a mountain and also the home of the gods. A sea is a sea and also a boundary. A wall is a wall and also a statement of power, fear, or memory. The ancient Greek world was full of such thresholds. Cities sat between land and water. Sanctuaries often stood a little apart from the center of daily life. Roads approached them with intention. Pilgrims and travelers arrived carrying questions, hopes, and offerings. Some sanctuaries were famous across the Greek world, like Delphi, where the oracle of Apollo was consulted by city-states and private individuals alike. The sanctuary itself was built on a mountain slope, and the site had an atmosphere of altitude and distance, as though the human world had climbed partway toward the divine and then paused there in respectful uncertainty. The oracle's pronouncements were often difficult to interpret, which may have been part of their power. Clear answers are comforting, but ambiguous answers invite reflection. Delphi was not the only place where the sacred seemed to reside in landscape. Dodona, associated with Zeus, was known for its ancient oracle, and in some traditions the voice of the god was heard through the rustling of leaves in a sacred grove. That image is especially gentle. Instead of thunder alone, there is wind through trees. Instead of a grand announcement, there is a listening to small natural sounds. It suggests a world in which divinity could be approached through attention. A grove, a tree, a breeze, a quiet question. The old world was not always loud. This quietness appears in many myths that center on hidden places. Crete, for example, holds many such stories. It is the island of the Minotaur, yes, but also the island of caves, birthplaces, and ancient kings. In one tradition, Zeus himself was concealed as an infant in a cave on Crete to protect him from being swallowed by Cronus. The cave becomes a kind of first shelter, and the island becomes a place where secrecy protects future power. In another thread of myth, King Minos is associated with laws, the sea, and the labyrinth. The labyrinth is itself a remarkable idea. It is not simply a puzzle or a trap, but a built environment that resists direct understanding. It is architecture turned into mystery. The word labyrinth continues to fascinate because it suggests both design and disorientation. A maze is made by intelligence, yet it produces confusion. That tension is ancient and timeless. In the story of Theseus and Ariadne, the labyrinth becomes a setting where cunning, memory, and fragile guidance matter more than strength alone. The thread that Ariadne gives Theseus is such a quiet object, but it carries an entire future within it. A thread is simple, it can be held in the hand, it can be broken, knotted, followed, or lost. And yet in the myth it makes the difference between wandering and return. There is something soothing in that. Even in the most complicated places, a small, careful thing can keep one oriented. Greek mythology often preserves these small, careful things. A wreath, a cloak, a cup, a ring. A ship's plank, a torch, a pomegranate seed. The objects are rarely just objects, they are carriers of consequence. Persephone's pomegranate seeds, for instance, bind her to the underworld for part of the year. The story is often told as an explanation for the seasons, but it is also a meditation on attachment. What we consume, what we accept, what we cannot fully undo. The descent of Persephone and her return are among the most quietly moving of all mythic patterns. They hold loss and renewal together without forcing either one to disappear. It is worth pausing with Persephone a little longer because her story has such a seasonal softness to it. In the older imagination, the earth itself seemed to participate in her movement. When she was below, the world above grew barer. When she returned, things flowered. That does not mean the ancients believed in a single, simple explanation for the changing year. Rather, the myth gives emotional shape to a natural pattern. It lets weather become relationship. It makes the cycle of growth and dormancy feel personal, almost intimate. Many ancient myths do this. They take what is vast and recurring and turn it into story so that human beings can remember it more easily. The same impulse appears in the myth of Demeter more broadly. She is one of the most quietly powerful figures in the Greek pantheon, a goddess of grain, fertility, and sacred lore. Her grief in the loss of Persephone is not only personal, it becomes a force that alters the world. That is a striking feature of mythic thought. Emotion can become cosmic. A mother's sorrow changes the field. A god's anger changes the sea. A hero's wandering changes the map. The boundary between inner life and outer world is porous. This porousness also marks the many transformations found in Greek myth. The stories are filled with beings who change shape, status, or nature. Daphne becomes a laurel tree, Narcissus becomes a flower, Arachne becomes a spider, Actaeon becomes a stag. These are often tragic tales, but they are also somehow hushed by the very fact of transformation. The self is not simply destroyed, it is redirected into another form. In the ancient imagination, metamorphosis was not a novelty. It was part of the world's grammar. Nature itself seemed to support it. Caterpillars became butterflies, leaves changed with the season, water turned to ice, rivers altered course, and stars appeared where none had been visible a few hours before. Transformation was ordinary and miraculous at once. The Greeks knew many of their stories through poetry, and poetry gave the myths their particular atmosphere. Epic, hymn, lyric, tragedy, and later prose retellings each offered different shades. Homer's epics, for example, present gods and heroes within a wide horizon of honor, fate, and homecoming. Hesiod organizes divine genealogy and labor into a more structured vision of cosmic history. The Homeric hymns linger over divine personalities with a kind of ceremonial attention. Tragedy takes inherited stories and turns them toward human suffering, ethical conflict, and the limits of knowledge. Each mode keeps the myths alive in a different way. That diversity matters. Greek mythology is not one single book with one single message. It is a woven fabric of local traditions, poetic elaborations, cult practices, and later interpretations. A god may be known differently in different cities. A hero may have multiple burial sites claimed for him. A family line may be told in slightly different versions depending on who is speaking. This is part of the charm and the difficulty. There is no final, completely settled mythic map. There are overlapping paths, like old roads across a countryside, some clear, some half forgotten. Some of the most interesting details in Greek myth are tied to local place and memory. A spring in one region might be sacred to a nymph. A tree might be protected because of an ancient story. A hill might hold the remains of a temple, while a nearby cave preserves a separate legend. In the ancient world, geography and story reinforced each other constantly. To travel through Greece was, in a sense, to move through layers of remembered tales. The land was not blank. It was inhabited by names. That sense of inhabited landscape also appears in the cults of heroes. Hero cults were not always about the great Olympian gods. They often centered on local figures, dead but honored, whose tombs or shrines could serve as points of civic identity. Heroes might protect a city, receive offerings, or be invoked in times of need. Their stories could be grand, but the cults themselves were often grounded in a specific place. This is one of the reasons Greek religion feels so closely tied to the earth. The dead remain near. The ancestors stay legible. Memory has a site. At times, the line between a hero and a god could be misty. Heracles, for instance, occupies an especially interesting position. He is mortal in origin and divine in later status. His labors are famously difficult, and yet the stories do not only emphasize force, they also emphasize endurance, suffering, and completion. Heracles travels widely, touching the edges of the known world. He encounters monsters, kings, rivers, and strange peoples. In that sense, he is not only a strong man in old tales, he is a figure through whom the ancient world imagined distance, hardship, and passage. His presence in myth is broad and restless. Other heroes, by contrast, feel almost tender in their vulnerability. Bellerophon rises high and then falls. Odysseus survives by patience and wit rather than physical force alone. Orpheus descends into the underworld not as a warrior, but as a musician, carrying grief in the form of song. His story is one of the most moving in the tradition because it connects art and loss so intimately. He goes where the living are not supposed to go, and he does so by the power of melody. Yet the myth does not promise a simple victory. Looking back in the famous moment changes everything. The tale becomes one of longing, trust, and the delicate conditions under which hope can survive. That underworld is a place of immense quiet in Greek mythology. Hades is often imagined as dark, but not necessarily as chaotic. It has rivers, gates, judges, regions for reward and punishment, and figures who guide the dead. The shades of the departed continue in a diminished form, and that diminished persistence can feel almost more haunting than annihilation. The underworld is not always a place of dramatic torment. Sometimes it is simply the place beyond mortal warmth, where memory is carried more softly. In some later philosophical traditions, the afterlife becomes a topic of moral reflection. But the mythic underworld remains older, deeper, and more atmospheric. It is a realm of boundary, not just judgment. Greek myth also gives us the great river boundaries of the dead, among them Styx and Acheron. Rivers are natural thresholds, and in myth they become metaphysical ones. Crossing them implies change of condition. The ferryman Charon, who carries souls across, belongs to that quiet borderland. His presence is austere and practical. He is not there to explain, he is there to convey. That very practicality gives the scene a peculiar dignity. A soul, a boat, a crossing, a destination. The image is spare and therefore memorable. There are many such spare but enduring figures in the tradition. Hermes, for instance, is a god of movement, communication, boundaries, and cleverness. He appears in many roles: messenger, guide of souls, patron of travelers, protector of flocks, and divine trickster. Yet there is something calm in his mobility. He belongs to roads, doorways, and transitions. He is one of the gods most attuned to passage. Athene, by contrast, is associated with wisdom, skill, strategy, and civic order. Her presence in Athens becomes one of the most famous examples of a deity and a city sharing identity. She is not merely a warrior. She is a patron of measured intelligence, craft, and thoughtful restraint. In myth, as in life, such qualities endure quietly. It is easy to remember the more dramatic gods, but Greek religion was full of lesser-known divine figures that speak to finer textures of experience. Nymphs, for example, populate springs, groves, mountains, and sea edges. They are often local, ephemeral, and delicate in their associations. They personify places that are already alive in some sense. Their stories are not always tragic or loud. Sometimes they simply mark the beauty of a tree line, the coolness of water, or the solitude of a hillside. The ancient Greeks noticed the inhabited quality of nature, and their myths gave that feeling names. Satyrs and Sileni bring a different tone, one of rustic vitality, music, and sometimes mischief. Yet even there, the atmosphere is not always frantic. The old depictions include flutes, vineyards, dancing, and the rough margin between civilization and wilderness. Dionysus himself moves through this territory. He is a god of wine, ecstasy, theatre, and transformation, but also of borders and reversals. His myths often feel like an inquiry into what happens when order loosens. The result is not only chaos, it is revelation. Under Dionysian pressure, masks change, cities panic, and identities become unstable. Yet the god also belongs to festivals, choruses, and communal performance. He reminds the ancient world that human beings are both structured and fluid. The theatre is one of the most remarkable inheritances of Greek civilization, and it is inseparable from myth. Tragedies by Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides retell older stories in ways that probe ethical tension and the fragility of human choice. These plays were performed in large outdoor theatres, carved into hillsides, with the sky above and the city nearby. The setting itself must have deepened the feeling. A chorus speaking in rhythm, masks altering the voice and face, ancient stories becoming present for a living audience. It is easy to imagine the stillness after a particularly sorrowful line, the shared silence in a great stone amphitheatre, the weight of recognition moving through the crowd. Those theatrical spaces remain some of the most evocative ruins in the Greek world. The theatre at Epidaurus, for example, is famous for its harmony and preservation, and the very idea of sound travelling so beautifully in open air feels almost miraculous. One can imagine the ancient spectators arriving by road, sitting together at dusk, waiting for a myth to unfold in language and gesture. The stones would have warmed in the day and cooled later, holding a little memory of sunlight. Even now, empty theatres can feel full of prior attention. The ancient Greeks were also keen observers of the stars, and their mythology gave shape to many constellations. The night sky became a field of remembered figures: Orion, Andromeda, Cassiopeia, Perseus, the Pleiades. Some stories explain how people or creatures were placed among the stars after suffering or adventure. In that sense, the heavens are another archive of myth. They preserve names in a form that is distant and calm. The stars are not reachable, but they are visible, and they repeat their patterns with patient indifference. Ancient observers found in them both orientation and wonder. It is fitting that myths and astronomy should meet there, in the deep dark where narrative and navigation share the same sky. One of the quieter pleasures of Greek myth is the way it often explains the world not through abstraction, but through memory of persons. A river is not just water moving downhill. It may be a god with a temperament, a breeze may be a god's breath, a flower may be the trace of grief or admiration, a rock may remember an event. This can make the natural world feel populated, but it also makes it intimate. Human beings are not alone before nature. They are among presences. The mythology offers companionship, even when that companionship is strange. This intimacy extends to domestic life as well. Although the grand myths tend to center on kings, heroes, and gods, ancient Greek religion also involved household practices, small offerings, and daily reverence. Hestia, goddess of the hearth, embodies that quiet center. She is not among the most flamboyant of the gods, but perhaps that is part of her significance. The hearth was a place of warmth, continuity, and shared life. In homes and civic spaces alike, it represented a point around which gathering was possible. Hestia's importance reminds us that not all sacred things are dramatic. Some are steady. Some are the reason everyone else has a place to sit. There is a similar steadiness in the ancient concern for burial and proper rites. The dead had to be tended. Burial customs mattered deeply. To die without rites or to be denied burial was a serious fate in Greek thought. This appears in myth and tragedy again and again. The concern is not only about the afterlife, but about social and moral order. The body should not simply disappear into neglect. Memory requires care. Ritual provides that care. In this respect, mythology, religion, and ethics meet in the treatment of the dead. The stories of the Trojan War are especially rich in this respect, though they belong at the edge of myth and remembered history. Troy itself, a city of layered remains and scholarly fascination, stands as one of the most famous vanished places associated with Greek legend. Its walls are part of a story that mixes archaeology, epic, and longing. Whether one approaches it as literary tradition or as a site of ancient settlement, Troy invites contemplation of how cities endure in memory after they vanish in fact. A place can be broken and still become immortal in story. That paradox runs through much of Greek mythic culture. The war at Troy opens into many smaller tales, each with its own atmosphere. Achilles, brilliant and brief-lived, carries the terrible beauty of youth and mortality. Hector stands for duty, family, and the doomed dignity of defense. Helen remains one of the most enigmatic figures in literature, associated with beauty, blame, agency, and the shifting interpretations of desire. Odysseus, returning from the war, turns the epic from battle toward homecoming, and in doing so gives the ancient world one of its great meditations on endurance. Home is not simply where one was born, it is what one must find again after being changed by time. Homecoming in Greek myth often feels complicated, as if the path back is lined with tests of identity. Recognition scenes occur frequently. A scar, a token, a story, a gesture, a name. Someone must prove who they are, and that proof is often tender. The old world cared deeply about whether memory could be trusted. Can a person be known after years of absence? Can a city welcome its own? Can the past be recognized without being idealized? These questions remain quietly human. There are also myths of foundation, in which a hero or divine figure establishes a city, a dynasty, or a sacred site. Athens, Thebes, Corinth, Argos, Sparta, and many other places possess mythic layers of origin. These stories are not merely decorative, they offer civic identity and continuity. A city is not only buildings and streets, it is also a story about legitimacy, ancestry, and place in the larger cosmos. Founding myths often include contest, omen, sacrifice, or divine favor. They tell a community how it came to be seen as itself. Thebes, in particular, has an atmosphere of tragic density in Greek literature. It is the city of Oedipus, Antigone, Cadmus, and many intertwined destinies. Its myths feel almost architectural in their layering. One generation follows another into conflict, prophecy, and ruin. The story of Oedipus is among the most famous because it turns on the painful relation between knowledge and ignorance. He seeks the truth and finds it, but in finding it he loses everything. Yet the play of that story is not only horrific, it is also profound in its treatment of human limitation. We do not always know what we are entering. We do not always know what we are becoming. The old myths understand this with remarkable patience. Patience is a surprisingly good word for Greek myth because beneath the grandeur there is often a long waiting. Waiting for a return, waiting for an oracle, waiting for a sign, waiting for the seasons to turn, waiting for the right ritual moment, waiting for a fate that cannot be hurried. Even the gods in some stories seem bound by structure and sequence. This gives the tradition its calm weight. Things happen but not instantly. Cause and consequence unfold across time. In that sense, the myths mirror the actual pace of ancient life more closely than modern storytelling often does. The ancient Mediterranean world moved to rhythms that were slower, more seasonal, and more dependent on weather, sailing conditions, harvests, and local political life. Sea travel depended on wind and safe harbor. A journey could be delayed. A festival could be timed to the lunar calendar. A crop could fail or succeed. Mythic stories reflect this environment. They include delay, detour, waiting, and return because such things were ordinary realities. The hero's journey is not always a sprint. Sometimes it is a long season of uncertainty. Among the sea gods, Poseidon stands as a figure of enormous force, but even his realm has moments of quiet. The sea at dawn, a harbor in still weather, an island seen from far off. The Greeks lived among coasts and islands, and the sea was both route and risk. Myths of sea voyages, shipwrecks, islands, and coastlines are therefore especially resonant. The world of the Aegean, with its many shores, encourages a sense of scattered continuity. One island sees another across water. Cities communicate by ship. Stories travel with traders, migrants, singers, and pilgrims. The sea binds as much as it separates. Island myths often have a particular hush, a remote shore, a cave where a god is hidden, a grove where no one goes except in story. A queen waiting on a strand, a stranded traveler, a monstrous inhabitant, a place that is both beautiful and difficult to leave. Many such places in myth are not simply exotic, they are thresholds where ordinary order gives way to something older or stranger. Yet even there the myths often linger on texture, the salt air, the cave mouth, the slow surf, the moonlit rock. The detail helps the imagination rest. Another quiet aspect of Greek mythology is its concern with craftsmanship. The craftsman god Hephaestus, for instance, represents forge, fire, tools, and making. His workshop beneath the earth or within volcanic regions is a place of concentrated labor. The stories around him include beautiful objects, forged armor, mechanical marvels, and delicate traps. This is not the noisy violence of battle alone. It is the patient intelligence of making things with care. In Greek thought, skill is a kind of wisdom. The making of an object can be almost sacred. A well-shaped cup, a woven cloth, a carved statue, a balanced ship, a tuned instrument. All of these belong to a civilization that understood form as a bearer of meaning. Athene and Hephaestus together suggest a world in which thought and craft meet. One governs strategy and civic intelligence. The other governs technical skill and constructive labor. Neither is merely abstract. Both are practical. Their domains remind us that knowledge in ancient Greece was often embodied in work. To know how to weave, smith, sail, govern, harvest, or speak was to participate in the order of things. Myth honored such knowledge by giving it divine associations. The same can be said of music. Apollo is often associated with order, harmony, prophecy, and the lyre. His domain includes clarity, measure, and radiant form, yet even Apollo's myths can have shadows. The story of Marsyas, for example, involves music, contest, and tragic punishment. There is beauty in the craft of sound, but also danger in overreaching or challenging divine prerogative. Still, the broader symbolic field of Apollo remains one of light and proportion. The Greeks saw in music not only entertainment but structure. A melody could reflect the hidden relations of the cosmos. That is a serene thought. To sing or listen was, in some sense, to participate in order. And yet Greek mythology never fully abandons uncertainty. Oracles speak in riddles. Heroes misread signs. Gods conceal motives. Mortals act with incomplete information. This uncertainty is part of the tradition's realism. Life is interpreted through symbols, but symbols are not always transparent. This is why so many myths remain compelling. They allow for ambiguity without dissolving into confusion. The stories are stable enough to remember and open enough to contemplate again and again. The preservation of these stories owes much to scholars, poets, painters, and later writers, but also to the resilience of oral tradition itself. Before texts were fixed in the forms we know, myths circulated through performance and memory. That meant they could adapt. A local audience might hear a familiar tale with regional emphasis. A poet might refine a version for aesthetic effect. A cult might preserve an older detail that later literature does not emphasize. The living shape of myth was flexible. It traveled with people, and people carried it because it helped them think about the world. That flexibility is one reason Greek mythology continues to feel relevant. It is not trapped in one final version. It can be revisited in new climates, new languages, new art forms. A film, a novel, a painting, a play, or even a quiet walk through a museum can awaken its atmosphere again. A fragment of vase painting, a line of epic, a ruined base of a statue, a dedicated stone with a name barely visible. These remnants invite reconstruction but also humility. So much is missing, and yet what remains still speaks. Sometimes what remains is a single gesture in a story, a god extending protection, a mother searching, a maiden turning away, a king making a vow, a messenger arriving late, a city weeping, a sailor seeing shore. In bedtime, these small gestures can be enough. They do not require explanation all at once. They can simply drift through the mind like lantern light across water. There is a gentle dignity in myths that end in constellations, trees, flowers, and stones, not because the transformation erases pain, but because it preserves trace. Memory becomes visible in the world. A witness can point and say, that star is linked to this figure, that tree remembers that sorrow, that stone marks that vow. The landscape becomes an archive of feeling. The sky, too, becomes an archive. Ancient people looked up and found the remnants of old narratives glowing back at them. And in a broader sense, Greek mythology itself is such an archive. It stores the concerns of an ancient civilization: kinship, honor, hospitality, sacrifice, travel, kingship, craft, season, death, desire, duty, and the fragile hope of return. It is a record not only of gods and monsters, but of the human effort to live among forces larger than oneself. The stories do not abolish mystery. They preserve it in memorable forms. Hospitability, or xenia, is one of those social values that appears quietly but repeatedly in myth. Guests must be received properly. Hosts and visitors alike have obligations. When these obligations are honored, society feels ordered. When they are violated, disaster often follows. The ancient Greeks treated hospitality as sacred because travel was dangerous and strangers were vulnerable. A house that welcomed a stranger under divine protection participated in a moral world that exceeded private convenience. In myths where hospitality is tested, the consequences can be severe, but the principle itself is calm and humane. That human scale matters. Even when Greek mythology deals with gods who move the cosmos, it frequently returns to the scale of a meal, a doorway, a marriage, a burial, a vow, a tool, a field, a hearth. The grandeur rests on small things. Perhaps that is part of why the tradition can be restful to think about. It is vast, but not abstractly vast. It is full of daily acts, a libation poured, a prayer spoken, a path followed, a lamp lit, a garment woven, a name remembered. So let the ancient stories continue to dim now as if their shapes are being held gently at the edge of sleep. Let the temples become outlines. Let the ships become distant lights. Let the groves be only rustling shadow. Let the cities settle under their own old names. Let the heroes rest from their long wandering. Let the gods remain but softly like constellations seen through thin cloud. There is no need to gather every detail at once. The mind can simply rest among them. Delphi on a mountainside, Crete with its hidden cave, Troy under dust and memory, Thebes with its layered sorrow, Ithaca with its patient shoreline, Olympus in bright distance, the underworld beneath quiet earth, springs, groves, harbours, roads and ruined stones, all of it held in a calm, ancient hush. And as the final traces of thought grow lighter, may sleep come with the steadiness of a returning tide. May it cover the day gently without erasing it. May it leave behind only what is peaceful and soft. The old myths can wait, the stones can wait, the sea can wait, the stars can wait. For now there is only the deepening night, the stillness of remembered stories and the quiet blessing of rest.